Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started. I'm Katie Krull, Education and Content Coordinator at the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. On behalf of AEM, thank you for joining us and welcome to the Maintaining a Culture of Safety Through COVID-19 and Beyond webinar. Today's webinar will be presented by Elaine Cullen Vandervert, President of Prima Consulting Services. Elaine's nearly 40 years of experience in safety research for U.S. Bureau of Mines and for NIOSH included a major study of occupational cultures to improve safety training effectiveness. She is an author of numerous publications, products, and convincing videos. Recipient of multiple awards from NIOSH, CDC, International Society of Mine Safety Professionals, and a Telly Award. AEM has partnered with Elaine many times. In addition to this, Elaine is scheduled to be our featured keynote at the Product Safety and Compliance Seminar in August, so consider this a small sneak preview of what the seminar has to offer. In moments of crisis, such as COVID-19, our instincts are to respond, fix, and lead, but culture often gets overlooked. Elaine is going to address that today. With such diverse workforces both in national backgrounds and generations, leaders must recognize how different cultures might respond differently to crisis and pivot accordingly. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please note that this platform works best in the Chrome, Edge, and Firefox web browsers. So without further ado, let me turn things over to Elaine.
Thank you, and welcome to you all. I want to talk today. I think the topic of my presentation is why culture matters, especially when we're working with workforce diversity and safety. Why should culture matter at all? Before we get into that, however, I think it's important to talk about the elephant that's standing in the middle of all of our rooms right now, COVID-19. Where we are right now, there is no one on the planet that has ever experienced it before. The world as we know it has changed probably forever. The new normal, whatever that looks like, is unknown to us. Our economy has been described as being in a medically induced coma. People are living in fear. They're overwhelmed with stress of the unknown and what in the world they should do about it. Because all of us come from different cultures, we have some clues as to how we're going to deal with it, and that's what I'd like to discuss now. So people respond to fear in different ways. In this particular crisis, we had people who hoarded toilet paper, and now it looks like they're hoarding meat. Some buy more food than they could ever possibly eat, and some eat and drink more than they ever should. Some binge watch TV or YouTube or are on Zoom meetings or whatever, and some people buy guns. The thing that is common to all of them is that people are doing what look to be irrational things to us, because they feel like at least they can control something. If I have enough toilet paper, at least that's not going to be the problem for me. So you start seeing people doing things that don't make sense to you, but I guarantee they're making a lot of sense to them. So what's going to happen now? Well, I have to tell you that I really don't have a crystal ball. I've never lived through anything like this before, and neither has anyone else. Therefore, we have no reliable data at all. We can sort of compare it to what happened 100 years ago during the Spanish flu pandemic, but we didn't have a technological society then, which we do now. And that's changed all the rules. This pandemic will end at some point, and the world will try to get back to some kind of a normal, and just what that is going to look like and what that really means to all the people out there who are either employers or employees is a big question. So for you, sitting and looking at this, You're probably wondering, how am I going to motivate my workers? How am I going to get them back to work doing the job safely? How are we going to focus on safety when they're still thinking maybe about whether or not they have enough toilet paper or enough meat to get through, or how their kids are going to be educated until the schools open back up? There are some ways that we have some clues, and I'm going to talk about one of my favorites, and that was some work done by Abraham Maslow. He was born in the early part of the last century, and he was a psychologist. And what he came up with was a theory that all people operate on what he called Maslow's hierarchy of motivation, that you have to be motivated to do something. And this is the pyramid that he came up with. You start at the bottom here. His first layer was the physiological. These are the human things, the things that keep us alive, that we have to have enough air, enough food, enough water, etc. These are basic needs for people. And this is a place where, quite frankly, people have been very stressed out about. Am I going to have enough food? Do I have a place to shelter, particularly when I'm told I have to shelter in place? Do I even have that? These are things that people have been very worried about. The next level, the safety level, is where we worry about things like our health, like the job that we have. Is my life stable? Is my family stable? Are we secure? Are we safe, in other words? And these things they're a little higher than the physiological, the physical things that we worry about, but nonetheless, very big concerns right now because of the pandemic and how things have played out across the world. The third level is the social level. This is where we work on friendships, on our families, our work groups. It's about intimacy. It's about relationships. And these are very important to human beings. Some of us are more social maybe than others, but nonetheless, we all have a very strong need for friends, for family, to fit in, to feel like we're part of something. Okay, the next level that Dr. Maslow identified was the esteem level. This is where we concern ourselves with achievement. How am I doing? Am I confident in what I want to do, in what I am doing right now? Do I have the respect of my colleagues and my coworkers, my boss, whatever? This is where I would think about, am I independent? Am I independent from my parents, from some other group that I, depend on to survive? This is kind of the place where all of us as employers would like to have our employees operating in the esteem level, that they want to achieve, they want to earn our respect, they want to be confident in what they're doing. Very top of the pyramid is what he called self-actualization. The Army several years ago had a slogan, I guess, was to be the best you can be. That's what this is about. Self-actualization is about being our best, about being creative and spontaneous, about attaining the potential that we all have. And this is what a lot of people have as a goal. I want to be my best. So what Abraham Maslow said, however, is that people, all of us, move up and down this pyramid every single day. Okay? If you think about times, maybe you had a job. From the introduction, you learned that I have spent a good bit of my time in the mining industry, also in the oil and gas industry, the upstream part of it. So where they were drilling the wells. So I spent a lot of time on drill rigs and in mines, and these are the kind of the high-risk industries. They're also places where you're outdoors a lot. You do your work outside. So this physiological part plays a big role. If you can remember a time, maybe when you had a job of some sort where you were sleep deprived, where you were so tired you really couldn't put one foot in front of the other, you really were not thinking about attaining your highest self and reaching self-actualization. What you needed was sleep. Also, if you were maybe working outdoors and you were up in Wyoming and there was a blizzard coming through and you were freezing, your hands were numb, your toes were numb, you're not really thinking too much about getting the respect of your colleagues. You're cold. You need that need to be taken care of. Similarly with if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, you've got to have those things taken care of, because the lower level needs are your strongest motivators. So what Dr. Maslow said then was that if your lower level goals are not met, it's pretty hard to move up that pyramid. You're not going to be thinking too much about the higher level goals if you're stuck down there. Most people right now are either stuck in level 1 or level 2 of that hierarchy. Either the physiological, I don't know if I'm going to have enough to eat tomorrow. I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. Am I going to be kicked out of my apartment or my house? Or that security level that says, well, do I even have a job? I've been laid off. I can't do my job at home. I have to be somewhere to do it. So what Dr. Maslow said is when you have people that are stuck down there at these lower levels, it is irrational to believe that they are going to be motivated to try and achieve those higher level goals, which are, for self-esteem, for, doing the creative things. People can't do it. So think about your own employees or the people that you work with or the people that you know, your family. Do you think people differ in how they work through this? Well, the obvious answer is, of course. Some people react more to stress than others do. So you as employers, now you're trying to get everybody back to work after this pandemic. You're trying to get them to focus on working safely and productively. You must understand that you have a whole gamut of people who are going to react differently. And a lot of that is because of the cultures they belong to. So let's talk a little bit about culture. What does it have to do with all of this, and why do I waste my time studying cultures? Well, let's have a definition, first of all. Here's another little pyramid. What it says is that at the bottom, we are all human, okay? We all share a human nature. This is universal because we are all human beings. It's also inherited because, quite obviously, our parents were humans too. So we inherit that human nature from them, and what that means, that those things, the need for food and water and shelter and all of those things are part of our human nature. Above that is culture. Okay, culture is learned. You learn it from groups that you belong to. It is always specific to a group. It is not universal at all, nor is it inherited. You have to learn it from people who are part of that culture. And then at the top is our personality. This is inherited to some degree, and it's also learned. So if you kind of move up this pyramid, you've got your human nature, and then culture, and then personality. Well, culture is where, because we learn this as children from our parents, really, the cultures that they belong to, whether that's a church or a national group, This is going to be probably one of the biggest parts of why we do what we do. So culture is really a collection of behavior patterns and beliefs that give us rules for deciding what's going on here, how do I feel about it, what am I going to do about it, and how do I go about doing it. It's a roadmap, okay? Culture gives us a way to get through all of those parts of our lives that we really don't know what to do about. So a pandemic is a perfect example. Nobody's ever done it before. So what we need to do is fall back on those cultures and figure out what in the world is going on. You know, does this scare me to pieces, or is this something I know I'll get through? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to get through this? Okay. The things that you need to know about culture is that, first of all, it's socially constructed, meaning the rules, all of those rules about how I feel about it and what I'm going to do about it are set by the culture that I am a part of. That's a very, very important concept. So the culture itself constructs its rules. It's developed over time, and it's always developed by the members of the culture and shared among those members. The older members are the ones who enculture the younger ones, or the newer members who come in, who tell them what's what, how things are around here, what's expected of you. It's a way to define who is in and who is not. Now, I saw a lot of this when I was working in the mining industry, because mining is a very strong culture. They have a pretty strong belief that only people who are part of that culture can really understand them. And some of the things that a culture like that will do is to create ways to make sure that we know we're part of it and that you're not. That could be things like jargon, and a lot of strong work cultures, occupations have that kind of jargon. If you think about the military and all of their acronyms, that's what it is. It's a way to define who's in and who's not, because if you're in, you understand all of that. If you are not, it's going to be a mystery to you. It's a social roadmap. It tells you, as long as I'm part of this culture, what's expected of me. Very difficult to define. A lot of people have questioned me and asked, well, what about all of the policies and procedures manuals? That is not where your culture resides, believe me. The employees know what the rules are, but they're not going to be written down anywhere. It's obvious to the insiders and outsiders that there is a culture there. What those rules are probably going to be defined by the ones that are part of it. So let's look at some of those things. We think about culture being a nationality, for example, generation. We have generations in the workplace, and we're going to be talking about that quite a bit here. Gender. I had somebody ask me one time, and this was in the mining industry, by the way, that says, do you think men and women think differently? And I just kind of looked and said, is that a trick question? Yes, we do, as a matter of fact. And we have those cultural things, the understanding of what we're supposed to do about something. Families. Your family that you were raised in was your first culture. It's the first one where you learned what was acceptable. You don't throw food at the table. You don't hit your parents. You don't scream at, whatever. Occupations, some of them have very strong cultures. The military is a good example. Firefighters, mining, commercial fishermen. These have very strong cultures, and they're, to a degree, closed to outsiders. Different than the organization. An organization is the company that hires miners or fishermen or whatever it is you are. They have their own rules and they have their own cultures. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Service clubs. Now, I put that in there because it's like if you were a member of Shriners, for example, or Rotarians, or some of these other service clubs, they have rules for how you're expected to behave, how you're expected, are you supposed to be at meetings? What are you supposed to do there? How are you supposed to dress, etc. Those are subcultures. They're little cultures that says, when I'm with this group, here is how I must behave. Geography. Now, I had somebody ask me about that. Why did you put that in there? And I guess the reason, I live up in the Northwest. I actually grew up on a small family-owned dairy farm. We were a farm family, and I learned to drive a tractor before I could reach the pedals. I had to stand up to do it. Somebody asked me one time if I thought there was a difference between kids that grow up on the farm and kids that grew up in the inner city. Well, again, of course there is. Of course there is. So whether you live on the East Coast or the West Coast or maybe down in the Deep South, wherever, your geographic location has its own set of rules and expectations. Okay? Alma mater, that would be like the school that you went to. What color do we wear? What are our school colors? What teams do we cheer for? Which ones do we hate? That kind of thing. But again, rules. Religion, all religions have lots of rules, and they're different from each other. So there's a cultural norm there that tells you what to do. Sports teams that you might belong on, whether it's a bowling team or a rugby team or whatever. Maybe you like to ride bicycles or something. All of those things have rules. They have unexpected. Nobody's going to write that down. It's not going to be, there's not going to be a guidebook for you. What you do is you learn these things from people who are members of it. Workforce is just as diverse. They have as many cultures as any other group. Right now we're looking at probably the most diverse workforce that we have ever seen, and that's because of a lot of things. First of all, we have actually 5 generations that are in the workforce right now, which has never happened before. We have national cultures that's been around for a long time, particularly if you work for a company that is global. You are going to have to deal with people that are from different countries and have different ways of looking at things. We're going to talk a lot about that. Regional cultures, again, gender, religious beliefs, family values, education. People who are maybe didn't finish high school have a different way of looking at the world than people who have what we call terminal degrees, PhDs and whatnot. So we have a lot of diversity in that workforce, and it is causing trouble. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, but it also is going to give you some clues about what to do. How do we get through this right now? So let's take a look at that. Let's start with generations. That's usually the one that people are struggling with the most visibly. Because one of the things that we do know is that whatever generation you are in is different from the others. So a definition, if you will, a generation is a group of people who were programmed at the same time in history. Okay? Here are some of the generations that we're working with. The traditionals, some people call them the greatest generation. People born before 1945. These are the guys, actually, a lot of them that went through the Great Depression. And if they were born on the early part of that, they also went through World War II. And these things really defined the world for them. That whether we survived depended a lot on what we did. So These guys have what we call a very traditional work ethic, and even though most of them have moved out of the workforce right now, they were the steady eddies. Baby boomers, this is the largest generation on the planet. These are the people who were born after 1946, after World War II. And all of the soldiers came back and started having babies, lots and lots of babies, which is why there's so many baby boomers, because this was a world event. So this wasn't just happening in our country, but everywhere. This is a group that is, well, defined by an awful lot of the things that they lived through, namely the Vietnam War, civil rights, women's rights. They saw a real turn in how things had been done for so long. So this is a group that has a whole lot of confidence. They also, because their parents tended not to having gone through the Depression or whatever, were not flamboyant. Baby boomers love their toys. And so you see a lot of the boomers who were working overtime, bouncing around to different jobs to maximize their income. And if you've ever been to Sturgis, to the motorcycle gathering there, an awful lot of the people who go there are baby boomers, because they're the ones with the motorcycles or the RVs or the whatever, the boats, whatever. Gen X is their kids. They're the ones born after 1965. This is actually the smallest generation, and they are characterized mostly by they're called the latchkey kids. They were the first ones to come home to a home where nobody was there. Their parents were gone. Mom and dad are both working because now women can. And so they let themselves in, got their own snack, did their own homework, and kind of kept themselves entertained. They're a very independent bunch. They also are characterized by the fact that they don't care much about stuff, that it is work-life balance that's more important to them. Gen Y, often called the millennials, born after 1982. This was the youngest group in the workplace for quite a while, and because they're more characterized because their parents, the Gen Xers, didn't want to be like their parents, the baby boomers. So what they tended to do was overparent. The millennials are often called the generation of that they they've had hover parents that did everything for them, and they got rewards for everything. They got trophies for showing up. So strong sense of entitlement. But also a group that really wants to learn about things and learn how to do things. So these are the four that were traditionally in the workplace. Now we have a fifth. This is Gen Z. They are the ones who are just starting to enter the workplace. Most of them have not, because the oldest are just turning 20, so they're not, there's not a lot of them. We don't really know what's going to happen with this bunch. What we do know is that they have never known a world where they weren't connected via their cell phones. They have been called the loneliest generation because they don't necessarily gather the way the other generations did in face to face. They do it on with their devices and count their friends by how many likes they get. So what's going to happen with this bunch? Well, that's going to be interesting to see. So anyway, we have 5 right now, and what we know is that there are 5 distinct categories of variables related to work that differ significantly across these generations. 1, the work to life and related values. So what's important to them? Making more money or having more experiences? Depends on which generation they're in. What motivates them? We saw Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so we know that, down at the bottom there, the physiological and the safety needs are going to be universal. They really are. But how they work their way up through those higher levels, it remains to be seen. Professional growth, what does that mean? How do people, what do they expect of their job? Do they want to stay in the same place, doing the same job for decades, or do they want to try new things? These generations differ wildly on this. The traditionals tended to stay in the same job until they retired. Millennials and the Gen Xers want to move around a lot, which looks like that they're not loyal to the older generations, but that's not what's going on. Attitudes about rules, authority, and hierarchy. How do we interact with our boss? Well, much more informal the younger you get. And then attitudes about learning and training and what do I expect from my employer? Are they going to give me opportunities to work? Am I going to or to go to school and to work into different jobs? How each one of those generations deals with this is very, very different. How they're dealing with this pandemic is also very different. I was trying to find some information about the Gen Zs, and it was a very interesting article I was reading. That now this is just people are guessing because we haven't gotten through it yet, but the teen years are when people generally start separating from their parents and developing their own self-image and kind of becoming more independent and trying things. Right now, nobody can do that. They are sheltering in place at home. They don't have jobs because they're probably not in one of the essential, things. They really have their ability to try new stuff and to be independent has totally been blocked. Now, is this going to be a problem for them? Probably. We don't yet know what it's going to look like, but probably they're not going to be quite as independent-minded when they get, we get through this thing. This is a proverb that I kind of liked. It says, people resemble their times more than they resemble their parents. So when we looked at that definition of a generation as of a group of people who were programmed at the same point in time, what we see here is that there are certain events that really mark us, and we go back to those, whether that was the Depression and people having to stand in soup lines to get enough food to survive on, whether it was when the 9/11, when the towers went down, when President Kennedy was assassinated, or just, how many millions of young Americans have gone through war in the Middle East. There's an author who wrote, he says, you are who you are because of where you were when. And what this really means is that those, what we call a signature event, a thing that the whole world changes at this point, that nothing is the same anymore. And so if you think about where we are right now, do you think that coronavirus is another game changer? Well, my guess is that it is. My guess is that this situation that we're in right now, this pandemic, has changed everybody. We no longer have that confidence that our economy is so robust it can handle anything. We no longer have the confidence that we ourselves can survive. If we get something like this, is it going to kill us? We've never had to deal with that as an entire world before. So my guess is that this is a game changer. And we can't let it be the elephant in the middle of the room. We have to come up with something. So as employers, when people start coming back to work, remember that they are going to be focused on those physiological and the safety issues that say, I need to be safe, I need to survive. And that's, I mean, when you open up your businesses again, it will be obviously with some different rules. You're going to have to provide that kind of physical protection, whether that's masks or, you know, just keeping the place clean or whatever it is. But I think that working within the cultures of the people, the employees that you've got, to understand that different groups, different generations are going to be more open to that than others. And you're just going to have to understand that if you see some pushback, it's probably coming from the cultural norms that people have. Well, let's talk about a different type of culture. And this is national culture. This is the countries that either our parents came from, we came from, or maybe our grandparents are way back, who knows what. This is this part of the work is going to be based on Geert Hofstede's work. He was operating back in the 70s, and what he was doing was looking to see if differences that he had noted were due to national cultures or to something else. So he did his first study in the 70s, and he picked a company that was international, that was IBM, which also had a very strong culture of its own. If you know anything about IBM, they kind of they used to be teased about the fact that they had a dress code, you know, a conservative suit with a white tie. If you really wanted to get crazy, you got to have a blue tie. So he knew that culturally the organization had very strong roles. So anything that he would notice as you went from country to country, he said would probably be due to the national culture. They did this, had 53 countries at first. They replicated it again from 1990 to 2002, and I believe that there is another version that is just about to come out. This is the most widely used information for global countries that are preparing people to work in other environments, because if you don't understand what the cultural rules are, it's very easy to misstep, and then there can be pretty severe consequences. So let's take a look at some of the things that he came up with and why those might be of interest to you now. He had 5 value dimensions, he called, of culture. They since have added another one, a 6th, but we are only going to talk about the first 4. The power distance, individualism versus collectivism, the masculine versus the feminine, and uncertainty avoidance. So let's take a look and see what he said. The first one, power distance, how he defined it, is the degree of inequality in a culture and the members' willingness to accept it. In other words, do certain people have more privilege than others? And is that okay with me? Well, it turns out that the USA and Canada have a very low power distance, whereas a lot of the Asian, Arab, and Hispanic cultures have a high power distance. Why should that matter? Well, in low power distance cultures, there is an expectation of equality among the members, that individuals can earn power. They can either get a better education, they can do a marvelous job performing, they can move up, in other words, into more positions of power by their own actions. Children in these cultures are treated more as equals, that if, for example, a family wants to go on vacation, they probably would ask their kids, where do you want to go? In a high power distance culture, there are very well-defined rules for who can do what, period. You're either born into power and wealth or you're not. This isn't something that you can change by your actions. So your job is to accept it. And in these cultures, children are taught more to be obedient than to be treated as equals or have an expectation. In high power distance cultures, now these would be like the Hispanic cultures maybe, or the Asian cultures, workers are not going to question a supervisor. Even if they're told to do something that they know is not going to work, they will do it anyway, because that is what the rule is. Remember, we're talking about cultural norms here. I've talked with a lot of supervisors, and they will say that they have people on their crews who they don't think are safe workers because they do things, maybe not wearing their PPE or not, trying to lift something too heavy. The problem in most of those cases is that they were told to do that, and they're not going to question their supervisor because that will look like disrespect. And that is a no-no. You cannot question the boss because that will look like you're arguing with them. There is a lot of respect for a person's position. Remember, your position is the one you're kind of born into. So in situations like this, stop work authority is a real hard concept because they are not, even if you tell them, if you see something wrong, just stop working. They aren't culturally attuned to be able to do that. Now, we're going to probably talk about this a lot more in August, so I'm not going to explain how to get around that. But in this kind of a culture, status symbols, privileges like having a private parking spot, that's okay. In fact, it's expected because they want to know that their supervisor is respected, and so that person would have some privileges that other people didn't have. Now, in low power distant cultures, workers are much more likely to challenge a supervisor if they think that he's wrong. This really does look like disrespect to other cultures. In lower power distance cultures, it's okay for workers and supervisors to socialize together. They may go out for a beer after the shift's over, or they call each other by their first names. This would never happen in a high power distance culture. In this situation, the best boss is someone who's resourceful, somebody that, because people will look at that, their supervisor, and say, is he going to be are we going to be able to be successful? Okay, and that's what's important. Privileges and status symbols are frowned upon in these kinds of cultures. So if you think about where we are right now with this pandemic, here's a world map that shows power distance. If there's white on there, by the way, that just means there's no data. Okay, so the lighter colors are indicative of a low power distance culture. The darker colors are where you would have a high power distance culture. What we're seeing right now in our country with a lot of the protests, if you will, about whether or not the states should open up their economies, whether people should be allowed to go and get haircuts. This is directly related to the power distance. This is not something that you would see in cultures that have a high power distance. They may not like it. They may be starting to look as shaggy as the rest of us, but there's no way in the world that they would address it because that's not allowed. Okay? The second one that Hofstede talked about was the individualism versus collectivism. And what that really means is the degree to which individuals are integrated into groups. So do I think of myself primarily as a member of this family, or as an alumni of this school, or as an employee of this company? The U.S. is the most individualistic culture on the planet. There isn't any other culture that has as strong an individualistic score as the U.S. does. Hispanic and Asian cultures are almost all collectivist. So what does that mean? Well, collectivist cultures, those with a low index, teams are more important than individuals. And one of the best ways that you could destroy your team is to give an award to one person and not the whole team. Because they know that it's the team that accomplished this, not the person. Individual performance evaluations are not as common in these cultures. Social harmony is more important than success. It's whether or not this group can work together. Now, we may not all really like each other, but we make a choice to work together, and that's what's going to happen. Family is very, very important in these cultures, and not just your immediate family, but your large extended family, and you are responsible for everybody. So, for example, if your sister's grandson doesn't have a job, it's really one of your responsibilities to help find a job for that person, okay? Members in these cultures will make decisions as a group, and then once that decision is made, which will take a little bit longer, by the way, for that process to work through, everybody will go along with it because they've all agreed to. People are very, very loyal to the groups that they're part of. So if you think about your workplace and you have employees who are coming from collectivist cultures, you probably notice that they spend a lot more time talking things out and discussing things. They're not talking about whether they're going to do the job. They're talking about how they're going to do it. Okay, in a high index culture, an individualistic culture, ties between individuals are loose. My accomplishment is mine. I mean, I'll look out for my immediate family, but I'm expected to look out for myself first, right? And if I'm going to succeed, it's probably because I'm the one that put in the work or did whatever it was that I think about the Marlboro Man, riding off into the sunset by himself, that this is kind of a good symbol of this individualistic culture. Individuals really value free time and independence much more than they do the team thing. And they really want challenging work that offers personal sense of accomplishment. So when we have a pandemic going on, this collectivist index is going to be very important, because when you have people from cultures that are collectivists, they're going to be much more concerned about the general welfare than they are about themselves. Okay, it's the individualistic cultures that said, well, it's I'm healthy, and So here is the world map again. As you can see, North America, Canada and the U.S. and Australia, very individualistic, and the rest of the world, not so much. Okay, this is going to be it's how people will respond to the pandemic and how they will respond to what am I supposed to do. Okay, the third one, the masculine versus feminine. Now, this is not to be understood as male versus female. It really has nothing to do with that. In a masculine culture, the focus is going to be on productivity and competition. In a feminine culture, the focus is on collaboration and worker well-being. Okay, the U.S. is pretty masculine. Japan is the highest on that masculine rating, and Sweden is the most feminine. So let's take a look at that. Let's see how the lighter colors there are the feminine cultures, where the concern for the overall well-being is what's important, and rather than productivity. Are we getting enough output here? Are we competing well against the rest of the world or against our competitors, whoever they are? Okay. And finally, what Hofstede called uncertainty avoidance. Okay, this one deals with a culture's tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. Okay, whether or not they can roll with this or not. The U.S. and Canada are pretty low, meaning we have a lot of, we have a lot of tolerance for uncertainty. Greece, Mexico, Japan are quite high. Now, so the cultures with a high index for uncertainty avoidance will have a much stronger set of written and unwritten rules. There's going to be a lot more rules about what people can do, what they can wear, where they can go, who they can go with, etc. They are expected to follow the rules without question. And if they break those rules, the penalties are going to be severe. In cultures that are, let me back up a little bit, that are having a low index for uncertainty avoidance, people will look at differences as a curiosity, and they are much more likely to try something else, different kind of food maybe, or, not get too worried about how people dress or how they look. The thing that, for this particular one, is that uncertainty is really an emotion. Okay, it's not based on rational thought at all, but on more of a fear thing. I don't know what's going to happen, and so therefore I'm fearful, and I will start doing irrational things. This sounds a whole lot to me like what's happening right now across the world. That this belief that we could handle ambiguity, that we could handle uncertainty, has been diminished pretty severely. Now, what's going to happen when things get back to normal? Well, that depends on what normal looks like, I would think. But more than likely, we're going to see a lot more uncertainty avoidance in the world. Here's what it looks like right now. The lighter countries or colors being countries that are tolerant of uncertainty. The darker ones, cultures that are have pretty firm rules about how things go. So two other cultures that we mentioned earlier, now keeping in mind that I did spend my work life mostly in the mining industry, you have organizations or companies and you have occupations. And having spent as much time as I have studying cultures, I know that these two are not the same at all. And it's when things happen, when there's clashes, that you can start to go back and look at, it's almost always a culture clash, to tell the truth. So you've got some big companies here, Peabody, Barrick, Freeport, etc. All of them, by the way, international companies. And then you have miners. Now, the miners are the ones that, in their opinion, know what to do. The companies, well, they have interesting jargon. The miners do for the company people who tell them how to do their job but don't ever come into the mine. So you're going to see, if you think about the organizations you work for, there are going to be clashes like this. If it's not as dramatic as in the mining industry, it may be subsets of the organization. For example, the marketing team and the accounting team are on different pages usually. The engineering people that have to come up with all of the stuff that the salesman promised maybe don't feel like they're on the same page all the time. So when you see conflict coming in, particularly now, because as we get back to work, there's going to be conflict because people are stressed. They don't know what the rules are. They don't know. They want to get back to where it was, and it never will be there. So look to the cultural classes. Here's a couple of non-negotiable rules of culture. Doesn't matter which one it is. Let's say that you're a member of a church. You cannot be a member of that culture if you break the rules. You'll get warned once, maybe twice if they really value you. But if you continue to break the rules, you will not be allowed to continue as a member of that culture. You will not be invited back. Cultural norms, the rules do not translate between one culture and another. So how you behave on, say, your bowling team and how you behave in church are two different things. You have different language, you have different clothing, you have different expectations for behavior. They do not cross. Here's one, the last one here that I've had some interesting discussions with, because a lot of managers think that they can change a culture, that's what they're going to do. I'm going to come in here and change a culture. Culture changes very, very slowly. Culture is created and protected by the members of that culture. There is only one way to change a culture very fast, and that's to destroy it and start over. That probably isn't your best option, but right now what we know is that things are changing. We don't know what they're going to look like. Culture controls what we do and how we do it. There are no exceptions to this. So as you get back to whatever normal looks like for you, start looking at how your employees, your colleagues, how they're handling this stuff, and understand that they all have these cultural controls, whether they're from their national culture, their gender culture, their generational culture. It doesn't matter. That's what is giving them the guidelines, the rules to move forward. Culture is a very important key to creating a safe and productive workplace, because you cannot force people to do things without their buy-in, especially something like safety. Unless you're standing there all the time like a policeman, what you want is for them to willingly and permanently choose to work safely and productive. And the only way to get them to do that is to work inside their culture. So what do you do now? Well, I'd like to suggest that you might attend the AEM Product Safety Seminar in August. It's going to be in Illinois, hopefully. I will be presenting not only the keynote talk on why culture matters, but I'm going to be doing a breakout session on leading the emerging workforce. And how do you get some more specifics on what do you do with these different groups, and how do you manage people that you don't understand very well. That's all I have. We aren't going to have questions, so I want to thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you in August in Illinois.